Hey, and welcome to another top 5 video. In these videos, I review the top 5 key ideas that are explored in each week of the course through the readings, modules, and activities. For each key point, I review the related course content that is most relevant. The readings and modules for week 3 present several ideas that did not make it into the top 5 list. They are still important, so you're encouraged to also review them. All right, let's get started. Here are the top 5 key ideas for week 3. Number 1, the central premise of evidence-based practice is the idea of integrating the best scientific evidence with other knowledge. In Chapter 2 of the course textbook, Wu provides an overview of evidence-based practice and distinguishes it from other related but different concepts. It should be immediately evident from the discussion that there are a number of different definitions of evidence-based practice. The Canadian Nurses Association's definition is highly relevant because it directly addresses nursing practice. The CNA definition is also different because it highlights decision-making as a key aspect of the process. As such, the CNA refers to the process as evidence-informed decision-making instead of evidence-based practice. It defines evidence-informed decision-making as the ongoing process that incorporates evidence from research, clinical expertise, client preference, and other available resources to make nursing decisions about clients. Decision-making in nursing practice is influenced by evidence and also by the individual values, client choices, theories, clinical judgment, ethics, and legislation. Evidence-based or evidence-informed? Is it a matter of semantics? The CNA remarks that there is an important distinction between the two terms. The concept of evidence-informed decision-making builds on evidence-based healthcare. It acknowledges that many factors beyond evidence, for example, available resources, culture, and religious norms, influence decision-making. Decision-making in nursing practice is influenced by evidence and also by individual values, client choices, theories, clinical judgment, ethics, legislation, regulation, healthcare resources, and the practice environment. Lastly, it should be understood that evidence-informed decision-making is dynamic, an ongoing process in which evidence, patient perspectives, and preferences, and clinical expertise and judgment are always evolving. Apart from evidence-based practice, there are other ways in which research evidence can be used in practice environments. These other processes, research utilization, knowledge translation, and quality improvement projects, are reviewed and contrasted with evidence-based practice in Chapter 2 of the course textbook. Key idea number 2, evidence for evidence-informed decision-making must come from rigorous research. In the previous weeks, we discussed the concept of evidence and its many sources. In evidence-informed decision-making, the term evidence refers to empirical evidence, that is, knowledge that comes from scientific inquiry. There is debate about what constitutes usable empirical evidence, but there is agreement that evidence must come from rigorous research. But what do we mean by rigorous or by the best evidence? Rigor refers to strictly adhering to a way of doing something. Rigor in research involves being exact, careful, precise, and controlled in the way you carry out research both scientifically and ethically. Scientific rigor refers to rigor in the steps of the research process. Ethical rigor refers to upholding ethical standards, including professional codes of ethics. It used to be that the most rigorous research was quantitative research that used strict positivist methods to try to obtain the most objective data. This type of study is called a randomized controlled trial, or RCT. RCTs are especially well suited for research purposes that intend to predict outcomes, such as a study about the effects of a healthcare intervention. This bias towards ranking the value and rigor of evidence based on research questions that are focused on the effectiveness of therapies has evolved. The best evidence is the best research that addresses the issue or problem using the most rigorous standards for that type of research. Nevertheless, there are hierarchies of evidence that have been developed. An example of a hierarchy is illustrated in the textbook chapter reading and for Module 3. In using a system like this, the evaluator of the quality of the evidence must keep the following in mind. The quality of evidence at any level can vary greatly. For example, the findings of an RCT may not be helpful if the research is poorly conducted. 2. The best evidence, from a nursing perspective, refers to research findings that are generated using the most appropriate methods, rigorous and clinically relevant for answering questions that are important to practice. And 3, confidence in evidence should be based on how compelling the research methods are, the presence of other studies that confirm the findings, and when it is carefully evaluated and synthesized. The number 3 key idea for week 3. There is a set of general steps to follow when engaging in evidence-informed decision-making. How does evidence-informed practice work at the bedside? How can I put it to use in the clinical setting? These are typical questions posed by nurses working in direct practice. There are a series of frameworks that have been developed for nurses and other healthcare practitioners to support efforts to use evidence in practice. All of these frameworks follow a basic process. In Chapter 2, Wu outlines 5 steps that can be undertaken for individual evidence-based practice efforts. Number 1, asking clinical questions that can be answered with research evidence. 2, searching for and retrieving relevant evidence. 3, appraising and synthesizing the evidence. 4, integrating the evidence with your own clinical practice, patient preferences, and local context. And 5, assessing the effectiveness of the decisions, intervention, or advice. These steps are detailed in week 3 module and within the textbook chapter. Number 4, to follow the steps of evidence-informed decision-making, nurses must understand how research is conducted. To engage in the steps for using evidence to inform practice, individual nurses must develop a value for and an understanding of inquiry and research. Additionally, individual nurses must develop the skills necessary to evaluate research evidence, appraise it, and integrate it with their expertise and patient values and preferences when making decisions. A starting point is to understand the 2 categories of studies previously discussed that align with the positivist and constructivist paradigms. In Chapter 3 of the course textbook, the author provides an excellent overview of the steps involved in quantitative and qualitative research. The textbook also reviews a number of key concepts. Particular concepts that are important to know and understand are variables, data, and relationships. A variable is something that varies. Human characteristics such as weight, age, height are variables. Researchers often study the relationship between variables. A relationship is a connection between phenomena or variables. In some studies, researchers are interested in a causal relationship between variables. In these cases, a variable is either independent, the presumed cause, or dependent, the outcome. For example, food is an independent variable because eating large quantities causes weight gain. Weight gain is the outcome and therefore the dependent variable. Lastly, data, the singular datum, refers to the pieces of information gathered in a study. The last key idea for week 3. There are different classes of quantitative and qualitative research. However, within each category of studies, the same basic processes are followed. What do I mean by this? Quantitative studies can be further divided into two categories, experimental and non-experimental. In experimental research, the researcher introduces a variable that can be manipulated, the independent variable, to determine how it affects the behavior of another variable, the dependent variable. In health-related research, the independent variable, or the one affecting the outcomes, is often an intervention or treatment. In non-experimental studies, the researcher is an observer collecting data without manipulating a variable, such as introducing an intervention. These types of studies often address questions about prognosis and the cause of diseases and conditions. The different types of qualitative research that nurse researchers engage in originate in social science traditions. The most common are grounded theory, phenomenology, and ethnography. But regardless of the subtype of study, in general terms, quantitative studies follow a particular set of steps that do not vary considerably from one type of quantitative study to the other. The process is very linear. In a similar extent, or to a similar extent, qualitative studies also follow a process. However, the progression is closer to a circle than a straight line. Qualitative research is continually examining and interpreting data and deciding how to proceed based on what has been discovered. That's it for another top 5 list. Remember that not all key concepts were addressed in this list. It is recommended that you review the 2 chapter readings and the course module for week 3. Check out the other videos in the series, and if you have any questions, please reach out to the professor for your section.